All right, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at simple interest. So if you don't know, interest is the amount of money paid or earned for the use of money by a bank or other financial institution. So for example, if you are borrowing money from the bank, like a loan, credit cards, things like that, you are paying interest. And those interest rates are usually super high because the bank wants to charge you as much as they can for using their money. At the same time, if you are saving money, so like investing, putting into savings accounts, things like that, that's interest that's earned. That's good interest. Now, the difference is here, most of the time, these interest rates are relatively low because the bank doesn't want to pay you out for using their money. So if you think about it this way, you put your money into the bank in like a savings account, and that's basically allowing the bank to loan your money out. So they pay you interest for allowing you to loan your money out, and then they charge interest from the other person for using your money, and then they keep some of that percentage and they pay you some of that percentage. So interest can be good and it can be bad, and so you want to just make sure that you're always really paying attention to your interest rates. Credit cards are notorious for having some of the highest interest rates, and that's why if you have a credit card in the future, you want to make sure that you're trying to pay off your balance as quickly as you can and as often as you can, so that way you don't accrue these really large credit card bills, because that's where a lot of people get caught up. Now, there's different types of interest, but we're just going to focus on what's called simple interest today. As you move further on in your math career, you're going to start learning about things like compound interest and stuff like that. So the way we can calculate simple interest is we use I equals P times R times T. That's the formula, where I is the amount of interest.
Nope.
So this can be both interest earned or interest that you're going to end up having to pay. P is what's called your principal investment. Oops, and that is the wrong kind of principal. Oops. Basically, that's the starting amount. So if you're taking a loan, it's the amount of the loan. If it's an investment, it's the amount that you invested. R is your rate. Now, the big thing to notice here is this always is going to be written as a decimal. And that's really important because if you don't change it to a decimal, it's going to make it look like your interest that you're earning or paying is really, really high. And then in this case, T is going to be our time in years. Like I said, this is simple interest. There are different interest formulas, but this is what we're focusing on today. All right, so we're going to do a couple of just like really basic ones, and then we'll go to some application. So for example, we don't know we are just trying to calculate the simple interest in this case. So you're investing or borrowing $675 at a 4% interest rate for 3 years. So the amount of interest that is either earned or paid is going to equal our initial investment, which is $675, times our rate of the decimal, so 4% is 0.04, and this is for 3 years. And then we just plug it all into our calculator, and our interest ends up being $81. Right, so let's jump down to number 5, and why don't you try this one on your own. So go ahead and pause the video, and then you can check your work. All right, so in this case, our interest is going to equal $14,095 at a 3.8% interest rate, so 0.038, because remember we're going to move it over 2 spots for 5.5 years, so we're going to write that as 5.5. If we multiply that all out, the interest ends up being $2,945.86. The biggest thing to pay attention to on some of these is just when they're months, making sure that you're converting that to a decimal. So like for example, 6 months would just be 0.5 because it's half a year. 18 months would be a year and a half, so it would be like the decimal 1.5. So that's the gist of just calculating the simple interest. So let's look at some now application type problems with simple interest. And we're going to figure out and kind of look at what the question is asking. So Marcia borrowed $8,975 at a 4.9% interest rate to purchase a used car. We want to know how much total she'll have paid after 5 years. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to calculate her interest. So remember, her interest is going to equal her principal amount. So the 8,975 times her rate is a decimal. And a really common mistake I'll see is that students will see a decimal in there and they'll just leave it. The difference of that is this would be paying like $4.90 for every dollar borrowed versus this is close to 5 cents that every dollar that's borrowed, which is a huge difference. So that's why those decimal places are so important. And it's gonna be for 5 years. So the interest she ends up paying or having to pay is $2,198.88. But the question isn't asking for the interest, it's asking how much total she'll have paid after the 5 years. So in this case, we would need to take her original amount, which is the $8,975, plus her interest, which is the $2,198.88, to figure out that in the end, she will have paid $11,173.88 for that car that originally cost her just under $9,000. Those are pretty straightforward. If we move forward, a couple of them get a little bit trickier because they're looking for missing parts. So we're going to look at number 12 because number 12 is asking after how many years will he double his initial investment. So they're not going to give us the time this time. So we want to know for him to double basically means he has to make what he invested. So our investment is going to be the $5,200 has to equal his $5,200 times his interest rate. And we don't know how long that's going to take him. So that's going to be times T. So now we have 5,200. And if I do 5,200 times the 0.065, we end up with 338 T. So we would divide by 338. And our answer is going to be approximately 15.4 years, and that's about what our T would equal. So sometimes they are going to give you missing parts, and then you kind of just have to manipulate the equation depending on what you are missing. So reach out if you have any questions, but that is the simple interest formula.